That chilling political declaration, which profoundly shook the history of diplomacy and the military architecture of the Middle East, came directly from Washington. In the most recent and striking statements reported by the international press, the highest echelons of the U.S. administration claimed that the ongoing military operation had effectively achieved regime change in Iran. This is not a routine declaration of war or a diplomatic note sent across borders. It is a declaration to the entire world that the existential resistance of an adversarial state has been broken, and its political structure has been brought to the brink of dissolution. As the smoke from these bold statements was still rising, the waters of the Middle East were split by a massive steel fleet. Thousands of U.S. Marines and the amphibious assault ships carrying them moved into their designated coordinates. At the same time, the Israeli military announced it had carried out a direct airstrike on that unique facility, unparalleled anywhere in the world, which forms the cornerstone of Iran's nuclear program. Leaked credible intelligence reports document that ballistic missile silos, the regime's greatest assurance, have also suffered severe damage. Inside the country, the gears of the state apparatus are grinding against each other and breaking. A fierce confrontation has erupted between the Revolutionary Guards, the backbone of the military, and the political leadership. Meanwhile, opposition leaders in exile are calling for a new order, promising stability amid this upheaval. The phase of the war conducted solely through aerial bombardment is coming to a close. A new unknown phase is beginning, one in which ground forces have entered the battlefield and the state is fracturing from within. Today, we examine the asymmetric dynamics of American boots on the ground, the struck nuclear facilities, and the anatomy of a state devouring itself from within. Let's begin. You cannot achieve a decisive victory in a military operation by merely firing missiles from the air. To capture or create a lasting impact in the geography you seek, you must physically land there. You must plant your boots on that soil. Recent CENTCOM reports leaked to international intelligence networks and the Wall Street Journal's field analyses prove how the balance of power in the region has physically shifted. Washington's plan on the table involves an extremely significant military step, considering the deployment of an additional 10,000-strong ground force to the Middle East. As the first concrete step of this plan, a massive amphibious assault ship carrying thousands of U.S. Marines has already arrived in the region's waters. These units are not ordinary patrol troops or peacekeeping forces. Marines are elite assault forces, specially equipped for direct amphibious assaults, securing beachheads, capturing critical ports, and engaging in close combat behind enemy lines. The deployment of such a substantial military presence to the region is referred to in military strategy as a force multiplier. Washington's preparations to deploy ground forces demonstrate that the war has now reached a level of direct, face-to-face threat on the ground, not just through radar. Now let's put everything else aside for a moment and focus on the core military dynamics. How can ships carrying thousands of foreign troops approach the shores of a major regional power so easily? Because the relentless aerial bombardment that has been ongoing for weeks has fulfilled its primary mission: shaping operations. Warplanes in the sky have severely suppressed coastal defense batteries, radar networks, and missile systems. Once air superiority is lost in the target region's airspace, conventional defense options against the thousands of tons of amphibious assault ships appearing on the horizon are reduced to a minimum. A ground invasion or the physical encirclement of critical facilities has ceased to be a theoretical threat and has become the most concrete scenario on the table. The deployment of American forces to the region was accompanied by a strategic technological operation conducted internally. The Israeli military activated the preemptive strike doctrine that had long been discussed in global intelligence reports. According to independent defense analyses and verified international reports, Israeli warplanes carried out a direct attack on a nuclear facility within Iran's nuclear program that is extremely specific and has no parallel anywhere in the world. Official statements from Israeli military sources, such as, "We are days away from achieving our major objectives," prove that these strikes are part of a systematic military plan. In geopolitical terms, this situation cannot be viewed as a routine airstrike. Israel's operation serves a purely cold and pragmatic military objective: to paralyze the opposing side's ultimate strategic deterrence capability, the possibility of a nuclear threshold, through conventional means. This unique facility that was struck was not merely an engineering project, but also the country's greatest bargaining chip on the international stage.
אנחנו ממשיכים לתקוף בעוצמה את המטרות של משטר הטרור האיראני.
The physical damage inflicted on this chip creates a seismic shift in the regional balance of power in Israel's favor. A state that loses its nuclear deterrence momentum is forced to confront all the geopolitical vulnerabilities brought about by conventional warfare. This systematic military pressure was not limited to nuclear infrastructure. Recent research and satellite analyses published by the Washington Post documented heavy strikes on Iran's ballistic missile facilities. These ballistic missile sites, built deep within the mountains over decades and forming the regime's striking power, became the direct targets of successive attacks. Satellite imagery confirms the severe physical damage inflicted on complexes housing missile silos and launch pads. An army's asymmetric attack doctrine relies on these ballistic missiles. When silo hatches are damaged and launch systems are struck, the Army's ability to conduct cross-border operations and its retaliatory capacity plummet dramatically. We are facing a conventional military structure whose striking power has been severely eroded. This intense and unprecedented conventional military destruction from outside has created deep fault lines within the state's internal backbone. There is an immutable rule of war. When the external security shield sustains heavy damage and the economy enters a crisis, fractures occur within decision-making mechanisms. International intelligence reports and political analyses leaking from the region confirm the intense internal confrontation unfolding in Tehran. A violent dispute has erupted between the country's political leadership and the command echelon of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, which holds the state's primary military power. This is not a routine budget or policy debate. According to news sources, this conflict is an existential clash centered on the course of the war and the survival of the state. While the military wing tends to perpetuate the dynamics of the conflict, the political and economic elites seek more pragmatic solutions to prevent the state apparatus from becoming completely paralyzed. In military sociology, such deep rifts between the armed guards and the political wing are the most concrete evidence that the decision-making mechanism has stalled and the state's reaction speed has slowed. When the chain of command fractures from within, no military defense line on the ground can operate at full capacity. The opposition front, closely monitoring the regime's deep crisis of authority and internal conflicts, has begun to raise its voice on the international stage. Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, in exile, called for a complete regime change to overcome the current crisis. Pahlavi's message to the international community was that he would bring stability to the country during the transition process. In an environment where the public's ties to the government have weakened due to high inflation, international isolation, and an endless state of war, this external promise of stability and change is a factor that further complicates the political equation. A state does not weaken merely because of armies at its borders. When the political and sociological fault lines within it fracture, it completely loses its resistance to external pressures. All this military destruction and internal political confrontation is reflected on the ground as a diplomatic retreat. A clear crack has formed in the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the lifeline of global energy trade, which has long been attempted to be closed with the slogan, "No one passes." As officially confirmed by the Islamabad administration, Tehran has reached an agreement to allow 20 additional ships flying the Pakistani flag to transit through the strait. At first glance, this permission granted to just 20 ships may seem like a small number. However, in military and diplomatic strategy, the implications of this move are profound. A government whose nuclear facilities have been struck, whose ballistic missile silos have been damaged, and which sees American amphibious ships on the horizon, cannot afford to completely sever diplomatic ties with its eastern neighbor, Pakistan, during this severe crisis. Relaxing the blockade in favor of a regional neighbor is a necessary diplomatic maneuver aimed at breaking the chain of international isolation, even if only by one link, and preventing the opening of a new front of geopolitical friction. However, in military doctrine, a blockade that has been breached and for which exceptions have been created is no longer a complete blockade. This special passage permit granted to 20 ships is a clear indication that Iran has been forced to relax its policy of absolute and uncompromising control over the strait. In a strait where warplanes patrol the skies and international fleets cruise the open seas, absolute initiative has effectively been lost. This passage of 20 ships is a concession made by a state under heavy military pressure to maintain its regional relations. Dear viewers, to summarize, those narrow-minded analyses that claim wars will remain static by looking at the borderlines on maps continue to miss the harshest realities of geopolitics. War is the art of eroding the enemy's military capabilities while simultaneously paralyzing their political will to make decisions. So what do you think? Will the arrival of U.S. Marines in the region and Israel's strikes on critical nuclear facilities pull the internally divided Tehran regime fully into a negotiating position? Or will this pressure trigger a desperate reaction that further escalates the regional conflict? I look forward to your valuable military analyses in the comments. I'm Charlie from the Mr.GEOPOL team. Stay safe.